The stars looked different when Jake Morrison stepped onto the bridge of the New Horizon that morning, but he could not explain why. He had been staring at the same view for 3 months as they traveled through space on humanity's first journey, beyond their solar system. The ship was quiet except for the gentle hum of the engines and the soft beeping of various machines that kept them alive in the cold darkness of space. Jake was a captain in the Earth Space Navy and had been chosen to lead this mission because he was calm under pressure and good at making quick decisions. He was 35 years old with brown hair and serious eyes that missed nothing. Behind him on the bridge sat his crew of 3 other humans who had trained for years for this moment. Dr. Lisa Carter sat at the science station running her fingers through her long red hair as she studied the data coming from their sensors. She was an expert in biology and had spent most of her life wondering what alien life might look like. Rick Palmer worked at the engineering station, keeping their ship running smoothly with his steady hands and quick mind. Amy Rodriguez was their pilot and navigator and could fly anything with engines better than anyone Jake had ever met. They were 6 months out from Earth, heading toward a star system that their telescopes had shown might have planets suitable for life. The mission was simple in theory, but incredibly dangerous in practice. They were to explore, gather information, and return home to tell Earth what they had found. No one knew if they would find anything at all or if they would even make it back alive. The New Horizon was not the biggest ship humanity had ever built, but it was the most advanced. It carried the best technology Earth could provide, including their new faster-than-light drive that made this journey possible. The ship was about the size of a large building and carried enough supplies to keep the crew alive for 2 years if everything went according to plan. Jake was reviewing their position when the ship's computer began making sounds he had never heard before. The screen in front of him filled with data that made no sense. Amy looked up from her station with wide eyes and said that their sensors were detecting something massive approaching from behind them. Lisa jumped from her chair and ran to her instruments. The readings she saw made her face turn pale. She told Jake that whatever was coming toward them was bigger than anything humanity had ever built, and it was moving faster than should be possible. Rick checked their engines and confirmed that everything was working normally on their ship. Jake ordered Amy to change course, but she reported that the object was matching their movements perfectly. Whatever it was seemed to know exactly where they were going before they went there. The crew watched their screens as the unknown object grew larger and larger until they could see it was not just one ship, but an entire fleet of vessels, unlike anything in human imagination. The alien ships were beautiful and terrible at the same time. They were made of materials that seemed to glow with their own light, and they moved through space without any visible engines or exhaust. The largest ship was easily 10 times the size of the New Horizon, and shaped like a crystal that had been stretched and twisted into impossible curves. Lisa worked frantically to scan the approaching fleet, while Rick prepared their weapon systems just in case. Amy kept the ship steady and ready to run if Jake gave the order. Jake himself stood in the center of the bridge trying to decide what to do when faced with the first contact between humans and alien intelligence. The alien fleet stopped just outside weapons range and hung in space like glittering jewels against the black. Jake could feel his heart beating fast but forced himself to stay calm. He ordered Lisa to begin broadcasting on all frequencies using every method of communication they had brought with them. For several hours, nothing happened. The alien ships remained motionless while the humans tried everything they could think of to establish contact. They sent radio signals, light patterns, mathematical sequences, and even music, hoping that something would get a response from the mysterious visitors. Finally, one of the smaller alien ships separated from the fleet and approached the New Horizon. It was still much larger than their ship, but small enough that Jake did not feel completely helpless. The alien vessel moved with incredible grace, sliding through space like a fish through water. A voice suddenly filled the bridge, speaking in a language none of them had ever heard, but somehow they could understand the meaning. The voice was calm and musical and seemed to come from everywhere at once. It said that they were representatives of the Galactic Council and that they had come to make contact with the humans of Earth. The voice explained that they had been watching humanity for some time and had decided that humans were ready to learn about the greater galaxy. They said their leader wanted to speak with the human captain about important matters that would affect both their species. Jake took a deep breath and responded that he was Captain Jake Morrison of Earth, and that he would be honored to speak with their leader. The alien voice said that their commander would come aboard the New Horizon if that was acceptable to the humans. Within minutes, a small craft emerged from the alien ship and approached their docking bay. Jake gathered his crew and they went to meet their first alien visitor. The docking bay filled with a soft blue light as the alien craft landed, and a doorway opened in its side. The being that stepped out was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes. It wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight and moved with fluid grace. It looked at each human in turn, and then spoke in perfect English, explaining that it had learned their language from their broadcasts. The alien introduced itself as Commander Zexthera of the Altarian Confederation, and said that it was pleased to meet the humans of Earth. It explained that first contact with new species was always handled carefully, and that there were procedures that must be followed to ensure peace between all involved. Zexthera told Jake that humanity had reached the level of development where they could be considered for membership in the galactic community. However, this would require them to prove that they were worthy of such an honor through a series of evaluations that would test their abilities and character. Jake listened carefully and asked what these evaluations would involve. The alien commander explained that they would need to travel to Nexus Prime, the capital of the Galactic Council, where human representatives would be tested in various ways to determine their proper place in galactic society. The commander made it clear that this was not optional, and that refusing would result in humanity being isolated from the rest of the galaxy permanently. Jake realized he had no choice but to agree, and told Zexthera that he and his crew would accompany the alien fleet to their capital. As the alien commander returned to its ship, Jake gathered his crew to discuss what had just happened. They all knew that their lives and the future of humanity had just changed forever, but none of them could guess how dangerous this journey would become. The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 days, during which the human ship traveled inside a protective field generated by the alien fleet. Jake and his crew spent the time learning as much as they could about their hosts and the galactic civilization they were about to enter. Commander Zexthera visited them daily to explain the customs and expectations they would face. The Altarian commander seemed genuinely friendly, but Jake noticed that it always spoke about humans in ways that suggested they were primitive and would need guidance from more advanced species. When Lisa asked about human technology, Zexthera smiled in a way that seemed polite but condescending, and said that human achievements were impressive for such a young species. Rick spent most of his time studying the alien ships through their sensors and was amazed by what he saw. The aliens used energy sources he could not identify, and their ships seemed to ignore many of the physical laws that limited human technology. When he asked Zexthera about their engines, the alien explained that humans would not be able to understand such advanced concepts for many centuries. Amy focused on navigation and was surprised to discover that the aliens traveled through space using methods completely different from human techniques. They seemed to fold space around their ships rather than moving through it normally. When she tried to ask questions about this, the aliens politely but firmly told her that such knowledge was restricted to advanced species. Dr. Carter was most interested in the biological aspects of their hosts and spent hours asking Zexthera about Altarian physiology and culture. She learned that the Altarians were one of the oldest species in the galaxy and had achieved interstellar travel millions of years before humans existed. They had helped establish the Galactic Council and were considered among the most wise and peaceful civilizations in known space. When Nexus Prime finally appeared before them, the humans could only stare in wonder. The space station was larger than any city on Earth and seemed to stretch in all directions like a metal planet floating in space. Ships from hundreds of different worlds moved around it in carefully organized patterns, while massive docking bays received visitors from across the galaxy. The New Horizon was guided to a docking bay, and what Zexthera explained was the section reserved for primitive species and new arrivals. Jake noticed that the other ships in their area were much smaller and simpler than the vessels used by established galactic civilizations. The message was clear, even though no one said it directly. After docking, the humans were escorted through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered with art and symbols from thousands of different cultures, and the air carried scents from alien worlds that made their heads spin. Creatures of every imaginable shape and size moved through the passages going about their daily business. Their quarters were located in what the guides called the orientation sector, where new species stayed while being evaluated for galactic citizenship. The rooms were comfortable but simple, and Jake could not help noticing that they were far from the areas where the more important species lived and worked. On their first day, Zexathara introduced them to the evaluation process that would determine humanity's place in galactic society. The aliens explained that these tests had been used for thousands of years to assess new species and ensure that they could contribute positively to galactic civilization. The tests were designed to be fair and would measure human abilities in technology, strategy, and social development. The first evaluation was scheduled for the next morning and would test human technological understanding. The aliens brought Jake and his crew to a large workshop filled with advanced equipment and strange devices. A crystalline being named Veltar, who served as the council's chief engineer, explained that they would be given a broken machine to repair, using only basic tools. Veltar showed them a device about the size of a car that he said was a quantum resonance drive used to power smaller spacecraft. The machine had been deliberately damaged in specific ways, and previous species had typically taken weeks or months to understand how it worked well enough to attempt repairs. Most never succeeded at all, and this was considered normal and expected. Rick examined the device carefully while Lisa scanned it with their portable instruments, and Amy studied the workshop to see what tools were available. Jake watched the alien observers who seemed confident that the humans would fail quickly and dramatically. The crystalline engineer made notes on a device that glowed with soft light and occasionally glanced at the humans with what might have been amusement. After 20 minutes of examination, Rick asked if he could have access to a plasma torch, some spare power conduits, and what he called chemical explosives, but the aliens dismissed as primitive combustible materials. Veltar seemed surprised by the request, but agreed to provide what Rick had asked for, believing that the human could not possibly accomplish anything useful with such crude tools. Rick began working with Amy assisting him while Lisa monitored. The alien observers and Jake kept watch for any signs of trouble. Instead of trying to repair the quantum matrix as expected, Rick studied the power flow patterns and began building what looked like a completely different device using parts cannibalized from the original machine. The alien engineers watched with growing confusion as Rick bypassed the quantum resonance system entirely and created what he called a brute force alternative using basic human engineering principles. He connected the spare conduits in a pattern that made no sense to the aliens and placed small charges at specific points throughout the assembly. When Rick activated his creation, the machine roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. The power output was crude and unrefined compared to the original quantum drive, but it worked perfectly and could have powered a ship immediately. The repair that should have taken weeks was completed in 6 hours using methods that violated everything the aliens thought they knew about proper engineering. Veltar stared at the working machine with obvious shock, while other alien observers began talking quickly among themselves in languages the humans did not understand. Jake could see that their success had not been expected and was causing some kind of problem among their hosts. The next test was scheduled for that afternoon and would measure human strategic thinking through a complex war simulation. The aliens explained that new species were typically given command of a small fleet and faced with an impossible tactical situation designed to teach them humility and the importance of knowing when to retreat. Jake was brought to a room filled with holographic displays showing a three-dimensional battlefield in space. He was given command of 12 small ships facing an enemy force of over 100 vessels with superior technology and firepower. The simulation had been carefully designed so that retreat was the only logical option, and species that recognized this quickly were considered wise and teachable. The alien military advisors explained the rules and objectives while Jake studied the tactical display. The enemy fleet was arranged in a formation that blocked all escape routes except one that led directly into an ambush. Every conventional strategy would result in the complete destruction of the human fleet within minutes. Jake smiled as he looked at the display and asked if there were any restrictions on how he could use his ships or what tactics were considered acceptable. The aliens assured him that he had complete freedom to command his fleet as he saw fit, and that there were no rules limiting his strategic options. Jake immediately ordered his ships to accelerate to maximum velocity and ram the largest enemy vessels while simultaneously broadcasting false surrender signals on all frequencies to confuse the enemy formation. When the alien observers protested that this was suicide, Jake calmly explained that sometimes the best way to win was to make sure your enemy could not win either. The simulation ended with most of the human fleet destroyed, but the enemy force completely eliminated and their objectives achieved. The alien military advisors stared at the results in stunned silence, while Jake asked if they wanted to run the scenario again with different parameters. That evening, Commander Zexithera visited the human quarters looking troubled and confused. The results of both tests had been reported to the Galactic Council and were causing significant debate among the various species representatives. Jake asked if they had performed poorly, but Zexithera explained that the problem was quite the opposite. The commander told them that humans had achieved results that should not have been mathematically possible, and had used methods that no other species had ever considered. The council was now uncertain how to classify humanity and what their proper place in galactic society should be. Jake realized that their success in the evaluations might actually be creating more problems than failure would have caused, but there was nothing they could do except wait to see what the aliens decided about Earth's future. Word of the human performances spread through Nexus Prime faster than anyone expected, and within days, representatives from dozens of species were requesting meetings with Jake and his crew. The corridors near their quarters became crowded with curious aliens who wanted to see the newcomers that had solved impossible problems and won unwinnable battles. Commander Zexithera seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the attention the humans were receiving, and warned Jake that not all the interest was friendly. Some species viewed human capabilities as threatening, while others saw opportunities for alliance or exploitation. The political balance of the Galactic Council was delicate, and the arrival of an unpredictable new species could destabilize carefully maintained relationships. Among the most persistent visitors were representatives of the Vorthak Empire, a militaristic civilization that controlled several star systems on the outer rim of galactic space. The Vorthak had been contained by the Council for centuries but never fully defeated, and they were always looking for new allies or weapons they could use to expand their territory. General Krexdar of the Vorthak military personally requested a meeting with Jake to discuss what he called matters of mutual strategic interest. The general was an imposing figure covered in natural armor with multiple arms and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal, but his words were carefully chosen and intelligent. Jake met with the general in one of the neutral conference rooms while Lisa, Rick, and Amy attended their own meetings with various alien scientists and engineers. Krexdar began by expressing admiration for human tactical thinking and suggesting that the Vorthak and humans had much in common as warrior species who understood the realities of survival in a dangerous galaxy. The general explained that most species in the council had grown soft and complacent during the long peace, and had forgotten that strength was sometimes necessary to protect what mattered. He said that the Vorthak had tried for generations to convince other species that they needed to prepare for external threats, but had been dismissed as warmongers and troublemakers. Jake listened carefully, but did not commit to anything while Krexdar described potential threats from outside the galaxy and suggested that humans might be natural allies for the Vorthak in preparing defenses against such dangers. The conversation was interrupted when Dr. Carter was called to address the Council's Biological Sciences Division about human evolution and development. Lisa found herself standing before an audience of hundreds of alien scientists representing species from across the galaxy. They wanted to understand how humanity had developed such unusual problem-solving abilities and why humans seemed to approach challenges so differently from other civilizations. She began by explaining human evolutionary history, starting with their origins as prey animals on a dangerous world. Lisa described how constant predator pressure, environmental disasters, and resource competition had shaped human development over millions of years. The alien scientists listened with growing interest as she detailed the Ice Age's volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and mass extinctions that had nearly destroyed humanity multiple times. When asked about human social development, Lisa explained that cooperation among humans had evolved not from natural peace, but from the necessity of survival against overwhelming odds. She showed historical records of human conflicts from tribal warfare to global wars, demonstrating how humans had learned to work together by first learning to fight together. The audience became noticeably uncomfortable when Lisa began describing human military history in detail. She explained concepts like total war-scorched earth tactics and mutually assured destruction while alien scientists shifted nervously in their seats. When a delegate from a peaceful species asked if humans were naturally violent, Lisa smiled and said that humans were naturally adaptive, which sometimes required violence. Meanwhile, Rick was meeting with a group of alien engineers who wanted to understand his unconventional approach to the quantum drive repair. They had studied his work and were baffled by his willingness to ignore established procedures and create entirely new solutions to technical problems. Rick explained that human engineering was based on the principle that any system could be modified, improved, or completely rebuilt if the situation required it. He said that humans had learned early in their development that following rules too strictly could be fatal when facing unexpected challenges or resource limitations. The alien engineers asked why humans seemed willing to accept higher risks and lower efficiency in exchange for simpler, more robust designs. Rick told them that human technology had been developed under constant pressure from wars, natural disasters, and limited resources, which meant that reliability under extreme conditions was more important than theoretical perfection. When pressed about the apparent recklessness of human engineering methods, Rick pointed out that his repair had worked while their quantum drive had not. He suggested that perhaps the alien approach of following established procedures without question might not be as advanced as they believed. Amy was discussing navigation and tactics with alien military officers who wanted to understand her piloting techniques and strategic thinking. They were particularly interested in her willingness to use civilian equipment for military purposes and her approach to three-dimensional combat in space. She explained that human military doctrine was based on the assumption that any conflict could escalate to total destruction at any moment, which meant that holding back resources or capabilities for future use was often a luxury they could not afford. Amy described how human pilots were trained to use everything available as a potential weapon, including their own ships if necessary. The alien officers seemed shocked when Amy casually mentioned kamikaze attacks, ramming speed, and using medical transports as missile delivery systems. When asked if such tactics were considered honorable, Amy replied that honor was meaningless if your species was extinct, and that humans had learned to value effectiveness over elegance in combat. That evening, Jake gathered his crew to compare notes on their various meetings and discovered that they had all encountered the same underlying concern among the aliens. The galactic species seemed to have developed under much more stable and peaceful conditions than humanity, and had never faced the kind of existential threats that had shaped human evolution. Lisa reported that many alien species had evolved from herbivores or omnivores that had never been serious prey animals, and had developed intelligence primarily for cooperation rather than competition. Rick noted that alien technology seemed focused on efficiency and elegance rather than robustness and adaptability under extreme conditions. Amy pointed out that alien military thinking appeared to be based on the assumption that wars had rules and that total destruction was unthinkable. Jake realized that the aliens had created a galactic civilization based on principles that humans found naive and potentially dangerous. Commander Zexathara visited them that night, looking more troubled than before, and explained that the council was deeply divided about how to handle humanity. Some species wanted to integrate humans quickly as valuable allies, while others believed that human methods were too dangerous and unpredictable for galactic society. The commander revealed that a faction led by the peaceful Altarians was pushing for what they called careful containment, which would limit human access to advanced technology and restrict their movement throughout galactic space. They argued that human capabilities needed to be controlled until humanity could be properly educated in galactic values and methods. Jake asked what the alternative was, and Zexathara explained that the militaristic factions led by the Vorthak wanted immediate full integration with humans serving as military advisors and strategic planners for various galactic defense projects. They believed that human abilities were exactly what the galaxy needed to prepare for future threats. The commander warned that both options carried significant risks and that the wrong decision could destabilize the entire galactic political structure. The Council had decided to conduct one final test that would definitively determine human nature and capabilities under real-world conditions. Jake asked what this test would involve and was told that he and his crew would be given command of an actual military operation defending a remote mining colony that was under attack by a species called the Devourers. This would not be a simulation but a real battle with real consequences, and the aliens would judge humanity based on how they handled genuine life and death situations. The colony was located on the edge of galactic space and was defended by a small outdated fleet that had been unable to stop previous Devourer attacks. Most species had either retreated from such positions or been destroyed trying to defend them. But the Council wanted to see how humans would handle an impossible situation when real lives were at stake. Zexithara explained that the Devourers were a nomadic species that consumed entire worlds and had resisted all attempts at communication or negotiation. They attacked without warning, destroyed everything they could reach, and disappeared before effective resistance could be organized. The defense fleet waiting for them at Mining Colony 17 was exactly what Jake had expected after hearing the alien description. 6 ships that looked like they had been retired from active service decades ago hung in orbit around a small, rocky planet where thousands of miners extracted rare minerals for the galactic economy. The vessels were outdated, underpowered, and equipped with weapons that would barely scratch modern military hardware. Admiral Yarthek of the Kajari fleet met them aboard the flagship and immediately began explaining why the colony could not be successfully defended. The Devourers would arrive in overwhelming numbers with superior technology and would destroy everything in their path before retreating to digest their conquest. Previous attempts at defense had resulted in the complete loss of defending fleets and the evacuation of entire star systems. Jake listened to the briefing while studying the tactical displays and ship specifications available to him. The defense fleet consisted of 2 heavy cruisers, 3 destroyers, and 1 supply ship, all dating back several generations of military technology. Their weapons were functional but limited, and their shields would not last long against serious attack. Rick immediately began working with the fleet engineers to assess what modifications might be possible with available resources and time. He discovered that the ships had been built with standardization in mind, which meant that components could be swapped between vessels, but also that their designs were predictable and inflexible. Amy reviewed the colony's position and defensive installations while Lisa studied everything the aliens knew about Devourer biology and behavior. The mining operation sat in an asteroid field rich with valuable minerals, but also filled with potential hazards and obstacles that previous defenders had ignored. Dr. Carter was particularly interested in reports about Devourer feeding patterns and reproduction cycles. The aliens described them as a hive mind species that consumed organic and inorganic matter indiscriminately and used the energy to create new ships and warriors. They attacked in swarms that overwhelmed defenses through sheer numbers rather than superior strategy. Jake called a meeting of all department heads, both human and alien, to discuss their situation. Admiral Yarthek began by suggesting various evacuation scenarios, while the Kajari tactical officers proposed defensive formations that might delay the Devourers long enough for civilian escape. The humans listened politely, then Jake asked about the mining equipment and infrastructure that would be left behind. When told that everything would be destroyed or consumed, he inquired about the explosive charges used in mining operations and the industrial equipment available on the colony surface. Admiral Yarthek seemed confused by the questions and explained that mining equipment was not designed for military use and that civilian infrastructure was irrelevant to space combat. Jake smiled and said that humans had a different perspective on what constituted useful military resources. Rick spent the next 2 days working with mining engineers to catalog every piece of equipment, vehicle, and explosive device available on the colony. He was particularly interested in the massive drilling machines used to extract ore from asteroid cores and the controlled demolition charges used to break apart rock formations. Amy worked with the colony traffic controllers to map all the flight paths, cargo routes, and emergency procedures used in normal operations. She studied the asteroid field patterns, the locations of mining stations, and the movement schedules of industrial transports that served the facility. Lisa coordinated with the colony medical staff and emergency responders to understand evacuation procedures, civilian shelter locations, and the layout of underground facilities. She also spent time with the miners themselves, learning about their work schedules, safety protocols, and knowledge of local conditions. Meanwhile, Jake met with the Defense Fleet commanders to discuss modifications to their standard tactical doctrine. He suggested that instead of trying to meet the Devourers in open space combat, they should draw the enemy into the asteroid field, where superior numbers would be less effective and local knowledge would provide advantages. The alien officers were skeptical of this approach and pointed out that fighting in asteroid fields was dangerous for defending ships as well as attackers. Jake agreed, but noted that humans were more comfortable with dangerous situations than most species and that the key to winning impossible battles was often accepting higher risks than enemies expected. When the Devourers finally appeared on long-range sensors, Jake ordered the defense fleet to take positions throughout the asteroid field, rather than forming traditional battle lines. Admiral Yarthek protested that this would leave the colony undefended, but Jake explained that the colony was not their primary weapon, but rather their ammunition. The Devourer fleet was exactly as described in alien reports, consisting of dozens of organic-looking ships that moved like living creatures through space. They approached the colony in a swarm formation that had overwhelmed previous defenders. Through coordinated attacks from multiple directions simultaneously, instead of advancing to meet them, the human-commanded defense fleet remained hidden among the asteroids while Jake gave orders that made no sense to his alien allies. He told the colony to begin emergency mining operations using maximum explosive charges while simultaneously loading cargo transports with everything from medical supplies to raw ore. Rick had spent his preparation time converting mining equipment into improvised weapons and turning industrial transports into guided missiles. The massive drilling machines were loaded onto unmanned cargo ships, along with enough explosives to crack asteroids in half. Amy coordinated the launch of what appeared to be a panicked civilian evacuation, but was actually a carefully choreographed series of attacks using converted mining equipment as delivery systems. The Devourers moved to intercept what they thought were fleeing refugees but found themselves facing cargo ships packed with industrial explosives and automated drilling equipment. The first wave of Devourer ships was destroyed when they tried to board what looked like helpless transports, only to discover that the humans had turned evacuation ships into massive bombs. The organic vessels that had evolved to consume matter found themselves consuming carefully prepared packages of high explosives instead. As the Devourer swarm moved deeper into the asteroid field trying to reach the colony, they encountered a maze of improvised traps and converted industrial equipment. Mining charges detonated in carefully timed sequences that sent asteroids tumbling into enemy formations while automated drilling machines attacked Devourer ships like mechanical parasites. Lisa had studied Devourer biology carefully and suggested targeting their organic components with mining acids and industrial solvents normally used to process ore. The colony's chemical processing facilities became weapons factories producing corrosive compounds that ate through Devourer armor and interfered with their biological systems. The defense fleet remained hidden until the Devourers were fully committed to attacking the colony, then emerged from concealment to strike at enemies trapped among the asteroids and confused by unexpected attacks from civilian infrastructure. The alien crews were amazed to find themselves winning a battle they had expected to lose completely. Admiral Yarthek watched in shock as the human tactics turned every aspect of the colony into a weapon system. Emergency shelters became camouflaged, weapon emplacements while evacuation routes channeled enemy ships into prepared kill zones where mining equipment waited to tear them apart. Rick had converted the colony's ore processing system into a massive projectile launcher that fired chunks of raw metal at incredible velocities using magnetic acceleration normally reserved for moving cargo. The improvised artillery could punch through Devourer ships at ranges that surprised even their builders. Amy used her knowledge of civilian flight patterns to predict where confused Devourers would go when their formations broke down under unexpected attack. She positioned defense ships at locations that looked random to alien observers but were actually based on traffic control principles that guided enemy movement into prepared ambushes. The battle reached its climax when Jake ordered the colony to activate what he called the final solution. The entire mining operation had been converted into a single massive explosive device using techniques that horrified alien engineers but proved devastatingly effective against organic ships designed to consume everything they encountered. When the main Devourer command ship moved to directly attack the colony, it found itself trying to digest a facility that had been turned into a carefully designed trap. The mining equipment the Devourers consumed was laced with explosives and corrosive compounds that destroyed them from within, while the colony's power systems overloaded in a controlled explosion that vaporized everything in orbit. The few surviving Devourer ships retreated in confusion, having lost their entire swarm to tactics they had never encountered before. For the first time in galactic history, a Devourer attack had been not just repelled, but completely annihilated with minimal losses to the defending forces. Admiral Yarthek stared at the tactical display showing the complete destruction of an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. News of the Devourer defeat spread through galactic space faster than any ship could travel, and within days representatives from hundreds of worlds were demanding emergency sessions of the Galactic Council. The complete annihilation of an entire Devourer swarm was unprecedented in galactic history, and had shattered assumptions about warfare that had stood for thousands of years. Jake and his crew found themselves at the center of a political storm that threatened to reshape the entire structure of galactic civilization. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive newcomers now viewed them as potential saviors or existential threats depending on their own political positions and military capabilities. Commander Zexithara arrived at the mining colony with a full diplomatic escort and a face that showed emotions Jake had never seen from the normally composed Altarian. The commander explained that the council was in emergency session and that the human victory had created a crisis that could either unite the galaxy or tear it apart. The peaceful factions led by the Altarians were demanding immediate restrictions on human military activities and technology transfers. They argued that human methods were too dangerous for civilized society and that allowing such tactics to spread would inevitably lead to galactic warfare on a scale never before imagined. The militaristic species led by the Vorthak were pushing for immediate full integration of humans into galactic defense forces with access to the most advanced technology available. They claimed that human capabilities were exactly what the galaxy needed to defend against external threats and internal rebellions. A third faction composed primarily of species that had suffered Devourer attacks was calling for human leadership of all galactic military forces and the immediate adoption of human tactical doctrines throughout the galaxy. They argued that traditional methods had failed for centuries while humans had succeeded in a matter of days. Jake realized that his crew had inadvertently become the focal point of a political revolution that could determine the future of hundreds of civilizations. The decisions made in the next few days would affect billions of lives and could either establish humanity as a major galactic power or result in their permanent isolation from advanced civilization. Dr. Carter was invited to address the full Galactic Council about human nature and intentions. She stood before the assembled representatives of over 300 species and spoke about humanity's journey from a dangerous world to the stars. She explained that humans were not naturally violent, but were naturally adaptive, which sometimes required them to become very good at violence when survival was threatened. She told the council that human history was filled with examples of cooperation and peace, but that these had only been possible after humans learned to defend themselves effectively against those who would exploit or destroy them. Carter emphasized that human willingness to use extreme measures came from experience with extinction-level threats, not from any desire for conquest or domination. When asked about human intentions toward other species, Carter replied that humans wanted to join galactic civilization as equals and partners, but would not accept subordination or control by others. She warned that attempts to restrict or contain humanity would likely result in exactly the kind of conflict that peaceful species were trying to avoid. Rick was brought before the Council's Technology Committee to explain human engineering principles and their potential applications to galactic infrastructure. He demonstrated how human methods could improve everything from space travel to planetary defense systems, but emphasized that such improvements required accepting higher risks and abandoning some traditional safety protocols. The alien engineers were fascinated by human willingness to modify or completely rebuild existing systems, but worried about the implications of spreading such attitudes throughout galactic society. Rick pointed out that their current technology had failed to stop the Devourers while human modifications had succeeded completely. Amy met with military commanders from dozens of species who wanted to understand human tactical thinking and combat doctrine. She explained that human military strategy was based on the assumption that any enemy would use every available method to achieve victory, which meant that defensive planning had to account for tactics that seemed impossible or unthinkable. The alien officers were particularly interested in human willingness to sacrifice equipment resources and even lives to achieve strategic objectives. Amy told them that humans had learned that some things were worth dying for, and that enemies, who were not willing to accept any cost for victory, would eventually lose to those who were. Meanwhile, Jake found himself meeting with political leaders who wanted to understand what humanity would demand in exchange for sharing their military capabilities with galactic civilization. He made it clear that humans wanted partnership, not servitude, and that any attempt to use human abilities without respecting human autonomy would end badly for everyone involved. The negotiations continued for weeks as various factions tried to find a solution that would satisfy their concerns, while recognizing the new reality of human capabilities. The peaceful species wanted guarantees that human methods would not destabilize galactic society, while the militaristic factions demanded immediate access to human tactical expertise. Jake proposed a compromise that would establish humanity as an independent member of the Galactic Council, with full voting rights and unrestricted access to galactic technology, in exchange for providing military consultation and defense services to any species that requested them. He emphasized that humans would not force their methods on anyone, but would not allow others to restrict their choices either. The proposal was debated intensely, as species tried to determine whether they could trust humans with full membership in galactic civilization. Some argued that human methods were too dangerous, while others pointed out that the Devourers had been a threat for centuries, until humans eliminated them in a single battle. Commander Zexithara privately told Jake that the Altarians had initially planned to guide human development slowly over several centuries, until humanity could be safely integrated into galactic society. The rapid demonstration of human capabilities had forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about managing primitive species. The final vote was closer than anyone expected, but ultimately the Council approved human membership with full rights and privileges. The decision was influenced heavily by reports from species that had been terrorized by Devourers for generations, and now saw humans as their salvation from an ancient threat. Jake addressed the Council after the vote and thanked them for their trust while promising that humanity would use their new position responsibly. He explained that humans understood the difference between being capable of destruction and choosing to cause it, and that Earth's goal was cooperation, not conquest. The ceremony formally welcoming humanity to galactic civilization was held aboard Nexus Prime with representatives from every member species in attendance. Jake stood with his crew as Earth was officially recognized as a full member of the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Dr. Carter was offered a position heading the Council's Xenobiology Research Division, where her understanding of adaptive evolution could help other species prepare for unexpected threats. Rick became the Director of Emergency Engineering Response with authority to modify or rebuild any galactic infrastructure that failed during crisis situations. Amy was appointed as the first human instructor at the Galactic Naval Academy, where she would teach courses on unconventional tactics and adaptive strategy to officers from hundreds of different species. Her classes became some of the most popular and feared in the Academy's history. Jake himself was named to the Council's Strategic Planning Committee, with responsibility for developing new approaches to galactic defense and threat assessment. His first recommendation was the creation of rapid response teams equipped with human-engineered equipment and trained in adaptive tactics. Within months, human advisors were working with military forces throughout the galaxy, helping them prepare for threats that traditional methods could not handle. The mere knowledge that human capabilities existed was enough to deter several potential conflicts as aggressive species reconsidered the wisdom of attacking neighbors who might call for human assistance. The galaxy discovered that having humans as allies meant that impossible problems became merely difficult, while truly dangerous enemies became manageable challenges. Species that had lived in fear of various threats for centuries found themselves protected by allies who refused to accept that any problem was unsolvable. Earth began receiving technology transfers and cultural exchanges that advanced human civilization by centuries in just a few years. The partnership between humanity and galactic civilization proved beneficial for everyone involved as human adaptability combined with alien knowledge to create solutions neither could have achieved alone. Jake often reflected on how quickly everything had changed from first contact to full galactic citizenship in less than a year. He realized that the aliens had been right about humans being dangerous, but had misunderstood what that danger meant for galactic civilization.